Hello, Corda, and welcome to Labour of Love with me, Síomha New York. On this podcast, we are going to cut through all of the unsolicited advice and all of that misinformation online and find out what we actually need to know. This is hopefully going to be a podcast for any and all pregnant people, whether you're on your first, your second, your third, or you're just starting to think about that pregnancy journey. I am so excited to be here chatting to you all now. There is nothing more interesting to me right now than pregnancy. It has been transformative for me, as it has been for so many others, and I'm delighted I have a space now to rant and discuss and soliloquize to my heart's content. But I have actually created this podcast for a few different reasons as well, not just selfishly. First of all, did you know that 86% of women are overwhelmed by the amount of pregnancy information that there is out there, which is an absolutely mental, staggering number. But it's no wonder with all of the very well-meaning but very unsolicited advice that we receive all the time. Secondly, I'm a little bit scared of how much information that I am gleaning from these 60-second clips online. I'm watching a video of someone on the other side of the world who has no qualifications that I can see, and I'm taking it as gospel. But I wanted to speak to professionals to deny or confirm some of these social media myths. And finally, I wanted to make life easier for pregnant people and expecting parents, because one thing I learned very quickly in pregnancy was that nothing else changes. Your work keeps going, your relationships keep going, your social life keeps going. And while all these changes are happening inside of you, the wider world just keeps on spinning, which makes it actually extremely difficult to consume all of these books and articles and ancient ohm stones that we're meant to be paying heed to. So on this podcast, I want to find out, what do we actually need to know? Now, I've broken it down to 6 different chapters. I could have done 200. It is an endless topic that we could speak about for hours and hours, but I have a bit of a looming deadline and a tiny but demanding boss who's waiting to meet me in just a few short months. So I'm going to keep it brief and keep it to 6 for now. I am currently 28 weeks pregnant and I'm enjoying it. I have to say, I've been very fortunate. My pregnancy has been fun and full of joy for the most part, and I haven't really struggled physically just yet. But I can hear all the mothers who already have kids screaming at me saying, "You've months to go, girl. Don't hinge all your hopes on that just yet." The body, of course, is constantly changing. All the changes, daily changes. One thing I've noticed recently is the nipple change. Okay, so apparently in pregnancy, your nipples get bigger and darker so that baby can find them easier for breastfeeding. If that's the case, my baby could find these things from space. Is that really necessary, pregnancy? I will be speaking to someone about all of these crazy body changes in a future episode, and I might ask them, why? Why do my nipples look like that? Although my baby will probably thank me for it. In today's episode, we are going to be speaking with Michelle Loughnane, who is a solicitor, and she knows so much about maternity employment law. And I feel like that's a good place to start, because it's one of the first things you have to think about when you become pregnant is, what am I going to do in terms of work? My working circumstances recently changed. I took a step back from a presenting job that I've been doing for 2 years. I've been working on R&AM and doing the weekends on R&AM, doing Friday, Saturday, Sundays, which I loved. But I was working 7 days a week. I have another job with Cuireann na Gaeilge. I also work with the How to Gael podcast, a very good podcast if you haven't checked it out already. And I needed some downtime. Something had to give. And I kind of looked at it in what was the most practical decision for me. And with my job with Cuireann na Gaeilge, I am covered. I'm a PAYE employee there, so I have paid maternity leave with them. Unfortunately, as an independent contractor, or if you're self-employed, you don't get that. We'll chat to Michelle about that to clear that up a little bit better, but that was the decision that I made and I'm happy with this. You know, I have my weekends free, I get to watch the guys on the telly, and who knows, maybe I'll go back after baby. So I'm looking forward to chatting about that and all other things maternity leave. Here we go, let's chat to Michelle. Michelle, you are so welcome onto my podcast, Labour of Love. Thank you so much for joining me. Now, when I reached out to you for this podcast, you said that this is an area of law that you are so passionate about. So tell me why this gets your juices flowing.
Probably because I'm a big employment law nerd. This is as exciting as things get for a solicitor, Síomha. But I suppose how I was introduced to employment law in the first place was I ended up doing a maternity leave contract with the late Richard Grogan, who was a very well-known employment law solicitor in Dublin. Started there on a maternity leave contract and didn't leave until 6 years later. Wow. That's how much I enjoyed it. But he would have worked an awful lot with employees who had their employment rights and entitlements breached, particularly pregnant women. And I suppose a very naive young lawyer starting out in this industry, I was really, really shocked that this was something that was still occurring in workplaces. And in fact, you know, when I worked on my very first pregnancy discrimination case, I remember looking at Richard saying, surely this doesn't happen. This just seems so archaic. And throughout my time there, I suppose I became more and more accustomed to just how common pregnancy discrimination still is in Irish workplaces, but equally met an awful lot of employers who want to put in supports to support working families in the workplace, which is also reassuring to see that cultural shift and change and moving forward and progressing.
But you don't just have experiences professionally, you're a new mum yourself.
Yes, I have a 16-month-old little girl at home.
So you knew exactly how to navigate it all.
Well, I don't know about that. Maybe the workplace, yes, but the parenting part was definitely all new.
Yeah. How's it all going for you?
It's definitely a mix of pure joy and love, a little bit like being held hostage by something very cute and tiny.
Oh, I can't wait to be held hostage. That sounds exciting.
You'll love it.
Okay, so let's start with those who are working in 9-to-5 jobs. They are PAYE, outline kind of our maternity employment rights there. So I know we're legally entitled to 6 months maternity leave, but where do percentages come in? Sometimes your work covers a certain percentage and the state covers another percentage, and do you have to be in a job for a certain amount of time to qualify for that?
Correct. So I suppose circling back, you find out that you're pregnant and you think, what do I do now? How do I notify my employer? So your first port of call should be to explore whether or not there's a maternity policy in place in the workplace. So you'll find that in either your contract of employment or maybe there is a company handbook or an employee handbook that sets out all the different types of policies that are in place in your workplace.
But should every workplace have that? Or is it a breach of law if they don't even have a maternity policy?
They should have a policy.
Okay.
It would be best practice to have a policy, but not everybody will. But the first thing you should do is find out whether or not a policy exists. And if it does exist, it's going to contain an awful lot of the answers to the questions that you have. So the first being, is it going to be paid or unpaid maternity leave? So there is no legal obligation on an employer to pay you while you are on maternity leave. You will receive the state maternity benefit, which is I think about €289 per week, which is a little over €1,000 a month, and it's definitely not going to replace your income while you're on maternity leave. But it is something you will be entitled to provided you have the correct amount of contributions made via social welfare. So an awful lot of employers will top up that payment. I think there's an awful lot of companies and businesses now that recognise the value in supporting working families from a talent attraction and talent retention point of view. So there can be certain terms attached to those policies. So they may require you to have been working in the business for 12 months, and they may also require you to come back for a certain period of time after your maternity leave if they're going to make that financial commitment to you. So that's one of the first things that you should check in your maternity policy, because it will help in terms of financial planning for going forward. The second thing to check is the notification requirements. When do I actually tell my employer that I'm pregnant, and why should I do that?
Yeah.
So the law only requires you to notify your employer 4 weeks prior to going on maternity leave. But
really?
I know
that feels a bit cheeky, doesn't it?
It really, really does. And I think at that stage it's very obvious, that you're pregnant and that you're going to be going on maternity leave. But I think really the sooner you notify your employer, the better, because you have more protections in place if your employer is aware that you're pregnant. And the second thing to bear in mind as well is that your employer may need to carry out a risk assessment from a health and safety point of view. Depending upon the type of work that you do every day, there may be certain adjustments or accommodations that need to be put in place so that you can continue to perform that role in a safe way.
I have to say, one of the things I was most terrified about when I was pregnant is letting my bosses know I was pregnant. Not for fear of recriminations whatsoever, but just I just felt weird telling my bosses that I'd had sex. It just felt like the weirdest thing. My parents, fine, didn't mind my parents, but telling your bosses, it's an intimate kind of conversation to have, isn't it?
It's where your two worlds collide. It's your personal life and your professional life all coming together in one conversation. It can be very, very tricky. And generally you'll find an awful lot of employers, the news is very well received. They're very, very happy for you. Unfortunately, some people don't always receive such a positive reaction. But, you know, there are certain protections in place and frameworks in place that you can utilise to help you navigate that situation if you find yourself in it.
I was very lucky. Obviously my bosses were delighted for me and have been very accommodating, but I'll never forget it was like I was 14 again. Do you know, telling someone I had my first kiss was very embarrassing.
That you did something very bold.
Yeah, pretty much. I know. Catholic Ireland is alive and well. And then I've heard of people fudging the dates so that they would lie about their due date so that they can take more maternity leave after the birth. Is that what it is?
So it can be for a myriad of reasons. So some people might just feel that it's private information and that they, you know, might hold off on disclosing when the date is, or disclosing, you know, they might disclose, for example, it's the month of September, but they may not disclose the month until a particular stage.
The date,
And, you know, that can come from a place of nervousness, depending upon the journey they've been on to get to that point and become pregnant. But sometimes it can also be the result of the culture or of the organisation. So, for example, they may be on a contract of employment and still working their probationary period. There may be promotions happening or pay rises happening, and they might be trying to push out the time to the next pay cycle run when that increase might be implemented. There can be lots of different reasons. Also, depending upon whether or not your employer is going to pay for your maternity leave or supplement that state maternity benefit. They might like to stay working as long as they possibly can to retain that income. But you must take your maternity leave 2 weeks before the expected delivery date.
Yes, yeah, that's important. Do you know what? I actually applied for my my maternity leave. I did it online on my welfare.ie, and it was the easiest thing in the world.
It is very easy.
Oh my God, I couldn't believe it.
It's very user friendly.
Yeah, it's like they've updated how to get your passport and now mat leave. I'm like, do you know what? We're not doing too badly. Let's break down some of the other terms in this area. So we know maternity leave, we know paternity leave, which we'll get to in a bit, but then there's also parents' leave and parental leave.
Yes. So parents' leave is a period of protected leave that's available to both parents, and it's also available to both the employed and the self-employed. It allows for a period of 9 weeks off work to care for a child. You can take it up until that child is 2 years of age, but an awful lot of people will choose to use it in or around the time of their maternity leave. So you will have maternity leave for your 26 weeks. After that, you can take additional maternity leave of 16 weeks if you wish, but that is unpaid by both the employer and the state. And then what a lot of people will do is the mum might decide, or her partner might decide, to use the 9 weeks parents' leave immediately after that 16 weeks of additional maternity leave, because a lot of the challenges that new parents face is the lack of available childcare. There's an awful lot of childcare facilities that will not take children under the age of 1 year, so you find an awful lot of workers are trying to build that leave up to the point in time when their new baby becomes 1 year old, and then they can avail of a childcare spot. So you'll often find people will use maternity leave, additional maternity leave, the 9 weeks parents' leave, and then they might use annual leave or parental leave, as you say, to bring them up to that 1 year mark.
Isn't that crazy? That, like, you know, the systems aren't compatible, you know, that we only have this much maternity or parents or whatever leave, and that childcare facilities don't take them till they're 1 year old. Like, how do we square that circle?
It's like the right hand isn't talking to the left hand.
And
we all have to stay working and pretend like we don't have a family, even though we do.
Goodness. Okay, so a bit of catching up to do there. And then parental leave, what exactly is that then?
So again, it's another form of leave that parents can take off work to care for their children. It's 26 weeks long. It's unpaid, but you can take it up until the child is 12 years of age. So again, you know, people might use it to supplement that period of time off when their child is quite young, or sometimes they might like to save it for when their children are older and use it during Easter holidays or school holidays, again when that childcare facility might be a little bit lacking, or, you know, school has finished and the parents are just trying to bridge that gap to keep that juggle going between work and home.
So with maternity leave, we get 26 weeks paid by the state, 16 additional weeks unpaid, which brings us to, that's 42. Am I right? Am I doing my maths right? I think that's 42 weeks.
I'll say you're right.
So, but a lot of women take 12 months. So is that they've added parents' leave onto that?
They can add parents' leave onto it, or they can use their annual leave. So when you are on maternity leave or parents' leave, you remain an employee of the employer. So your annual leave rights continue to accrue during that period of time, even though you haven't been physically in the workplace. So you can get to the end of your maternity leave and find you've actually accumulated quite a lot of annual leave and your public holidays as well.
I just heard about the public holidays. I was like, this is great. That's an extra week for me because I'm taking off January to June-ish. I accrued like 5 or 6 public holidays.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Yeah, it is. It is.
And then I go back and I have all my annual leave as well, which I also didn't realise.
Yeah, and some employers are great. They will allow an employee returning from maternity leave to utilise their annual leave to return on maybe a 3-day week or a 4-day week, if that is something you choose to do. So it's just a great way of incorporating that flexibility into your working life to support that transition from coming back from leave back into the workplace.
I was surprised though by what you said earlier, that it's not actually legally required for every employer to supply maternity leave.
Well, they must give you the leave.
Okay.
They don't have to pay for the leave.
Yeah, I didn't realise that. I thought it was mandated.
Yeah, no, it's really difficult and it can be a huge financial burden for families. I mean, we're living in times where the cost of living is at an all-time high.
Absolutely.
Childcare is not cheap. You know, it is really, really challenging. You know, and an awful lot of people, they might have to take that into account, you know, when they're family planning and save and create a little fund to support the mother being on maternity leave for that period of time.
Goodness. Okay, let's talk about paternity leave. Fathers are statutorily entitled to 2 weeks paternity leave. But are we seeing a trend of companies offering more than this now?
Sometimes. It depends on the company. An awful lot of bigger companies or global companies, you know, they will offer more than the statutory 2 weeks, which is great, you know, but an awful lot of people are employed by small to medium size enterprises and they just really can't compete with these global companies. But I think what we're seeing is there's certainly a very good uptake in people taking their paternity leave. You know, newer, younger workers expect to receive it and, you know, will be taking it. And I think all of that is really positive.
We're just talking about the 2 weeks here. You're saying there's an uptake in that?
Yeah.
Really? So people didn't used to take it?
It only came into effect in 2016. It's actually very new.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So the only option available to fathers previously was to maybe use annual leave or save their annual leave for in or around the time that the baby was due. Wow. It was really, really challenging. And the 2 week period, yes, while it's progressive and it's a step forward, it's such a short period of time. I mean, in my opinion, it's not nearly enough. I remember the first day my husband went back to work after I was on maternity leave, and I was nearly looking at him going out the door thinking, oh my God, please don't leave. And I knew by the look on his face, he thought he was doing something wrong by walking out the door and going to work. It is such a short period of time. And again, I think this is sometimes where the law hasn't really caught up with society, in that, you know, years ago you would have all of your family around you when you would have a baby, and you know the phrase "it takes a village," it has come from somewhere, but that village doesn't really exist anymore, and an awful lot of people don't live in close proximity to their parents, or if they do, we also need to bear in mind that as women we're an awful lot older now having children, which means grandparents are older, and while, you know, they may be in great health and are ready, willing and able to help and support, one, they're not obligated to do that. You know, they should be enjoying their retirement, but sometimes, you know, you might find that when people get to their 70s or their 80s, they have various different health difficulties that might limit the support that they can provide to their children when the grandchildren come along. So I think if we could see an extension of time for paternity leave, it would be great.
Now I'm passionate about this, right? I could get up on a soapbox and talk about this all day, because not only
Go for it.
this is why I created the podcast. Like, not only would obviously extended paternity leave help in terms of bonding with your new child and supporting the birthing partner, but also when we talk about equality in the workplace and the gender wage gap, the fact that women take 6 months or more off, like, that leaves them on an uneven footing with other people. That leaves them, overlooked for promotional opportunities and progressing in the workplace. And that's kind of the biggest contributing factor to the gender wage gap, is maternity leave and women leaving the workforce for a perfectly valid reason. But like, would they not look at giving men 6 months mandated leave as well, and that would just even the playing field across the board?
I agree.
Or is that just fantastical?
No, it's not a romantic notion. There are other jurisdictions that provide for shared maternity leave, where that 6 month period can be split between the parents if that's what they choose to do. It may not suit every household, but it could suit an awful lot of households. But I do think that if we introduce something like shared maternity leave, or an extended period of paternity leave that maybe could be used in parallel with the woman using her maternity leave, or maybe when the maternity leave had concluded, that the option was there for the father to use paternity leave at that particular stage, it would go a long way in levelling the playing field in the workplace, because it would create a culture where men are perceived as caregivers. That doesn't really exist. And while we've seen a really good uptake on men taking paternity leave, I'd be interested to see the data of how many men have taken the 9 weeks parents' leave, or indeed the 26 weeks parental leave. Because I don't believe that's something that you see all that frequently. And I also, I don't place fault with the men for that. I think that's a cultural issue. I would be interested to see, men in a male-dominated work environment, how it is received for a man to say, I'm taking 9 weeks parents' leave so my wife can return to work. I just don't think that exists at the moment. I would love to be proven otherwise.
Yes.
Maybe people can provide examples, but I think when we see that becoming commonplace, it definitely will go a long way in levelling the playing field. And I mean, we need to acknowledge that dads do play an active role in family life and have a desire to play an active role in family life. And I think that needs to be supported.
Absolutely. And like you said, it's not a finger pointing at the men here. It's a societal structure, that they're a part of. You mentioned other jurisdictions there. I know we're streets ahead when it comes to places like America, where there's no mandated maternity leave. But are there some places that you think we should be looking to emulate?
Oh, well, I know the Scandinavian countries have, really good frameworks in place that support family life. I think we're a long way off putting something like that in place, but I think, we're getting there. As I said, paternity leave only came in 2016. It still feels very new, even though it's 10 years next year. But it is
10
progress.
Years is young, though.
It is.
I'm floored by that, Michelle. It's only 10 years.
Yeah, I know.
Can I ask you about same-sex couples and what applies there?
So it's the same rights and entitlements that apply. The difficulty is that the legislation is quite old and archaic, and it is drafted in that male-female context, but the same rights and entitlements apply.
Okay, brilliant. Parents' leave, parental leave, all the fun stuff. Okay. Let's talk about discrimination. You mentioned that at the top of the episode, and how surprised you were by how prevalent pregnancy discrimination still was. Now, I'm guessing that was when you started your career in law. Is it still as prevalent today?
Unfortunately, yes,
Really?
it is. Yeah, and while we have come a long way, unfortunately, there are still workplaces and people that view pregnancy as an inconvenience to the business. A lot of that can be due to inexperience and bad management practices. I mean, somebody said to me before, I can plan for a pregnancy. I can't plan for an employee with a broken leg, because, someone breaks their leg over the weekend and they're not in work on Monday morning. Whereas a pregnancy, you can in fact put a plan in place for the workload and for the business. But no, it is something that's unfortunately quite common. And I think I have definitely a whole new appreciation for women that experience that kind of prejudice after having had a baby myself, because it's a very vulnerable time, and while it's a very special and lovely time, there are aspects to maternity leave that can be quite lonely and isolating. So if in addition to that you're experiencing discriminatory treatment from your employer, whether that's during your pregnancy, during your leave, or as you're about to embark on your return to work, that's really difficult. And when the catalyst for that behaviour is this beautiful baby staring back at you, it's a very difficult mindset and situation to find yourself in.
Yeah, goodness. My mum has this amazing story of, I think she was about 8 months pregnant, must have been with me, and she went for a job interview at 8 months pregnant, right, for a permanent teaching position. And she got the job, went on maternity leave, took 6 months, came back and still had her permanent teaching position, you know. And I was even shocked by that story. That would have been in the 90s, you know. Like I think that's quite progressive, you know, for the 90s. So I'm shocked to hear that it's still as prevalent. Are there industries where it's more prevalent than others?
No, pregnancy discrimination does not discriminate, unfortunately. You will find it everywhere.
Oh, no.
You know, you will find it in every profession, across every industry, which is very disheartening. But I think the important thing to realise is that women who find themselves in this particular situation, they are not alone. It will feel lonely, but you are not alone. This does happen, and it has happened and will continue to happen to other women. But there are an awful lot of protections in place. From the moment you inform your employer that you are pregnant, you are heavily protected by Irish law. So you're protected from discrimination, which is any kind of differential treatment purely on the basis that you are pregnant, or you are on maternity leave, or about to go on maternity leave, or you have just returned from maternity related leave. So what does that look like, or how can you go about, you know, enforcing that? So I think what an awful lot of women might experience is the first thing they might experience is a negative reaction to the fact that they are pregnant or that they are about to go on leave. So that can be, you know, negative commentary. What was once a very warm relationship suddenly becomes cold. And initially, I think an awful lot of women dismiss that kind of treatment and say, you know, it'll be fine, you know, or maybe that person is distracted or busy or whatever. But what they will generally find is the behaviour will intensify as the weeks and months progress, to the point where they just simply can't ignore it anymore. You know, another kind of common tool that's used to discriminate against pregnant women is redundancy. You find you're coming back to work and you're suddenly notified that your role is at risk of redundancy. Or another tool that you find is often utilised is our fixed term contracts. So you might have somebody that is employed on successive fixed term contracts, and suddenly they might be notified that, well, your contract is coming to an end on this particular date and it won't be renewed thereafter going forward. And on the face of it, that can look quite legitimate. But when you actually start to assess and examine the context of the situation, you realise, well, actually, this is not common practice in this particular workplace. And this is not what happens to other employees who are not pregnant. So why is it happening to me? So I think, you know, it's a tricky situation to find yourself in. There are a lot of factors that need to be assessed, you know, for an awful lot of women, as we discussed at the outset of the episode. You're not entitled to paid maternity benefit from your employer. But if your employer is choosing to give that top-up payment to you, there might be terms and conditions attached to that. So you may need to be employed for 12 months or 24 months before you qualify for that payment. But if you find yourself in a situation where you're about to lose your job, searching for another job, if a paid maternity leave policy is a priority for you, that's quite tricky, because it might impact your decision to have a second or subsequent child thereafter. So it really can place people in a difficult scenario.
Yeah. So a couple of things then. I have two thoughts after what you just said there. First of all, if a woman does find that she's experiencing pregnancy discrimination in a workplace, what should she do? What are the steps she should take to go about that?
So the first thing I would say is document everything. And I always think it's helpful to speak to somebody that can be a little bit more objective, that isn't involved in the workplace or that doesn't work with you. So that might be your partner, a family member or friend, because it's important to assess whether this is actually discrimination or whether it's just the product of really poor management practices. If at that point you feel that, you know, this behaviour is simply not acceptable, I'm a firm believer in trying to address matters head on. But it's important that you feel equipped and able to have that discussion with the person that's directing that treatment at you. So if you feel that you can have that discussion, by all means, you can raise it directly with the person. But an awful lot of workplaces will have processes in place to assist and support you in addressing those kind of concerns. So that might be a grievance procedure, or it might be a harassment procedure, depending on the type of behaviour you're enduring. And you can raise the complaint internally to have it investigated and try to have it resolved. And that all sounds very easy and very hunky-dory, but it can be a bit more nuanced, particularly if you're working in a very small workplace. You mightn't feel confident addressing it directly with the person.
Awkward just thinking of relationships and stuff in work, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. So if you find yourself in that particular set of circumstances, it's okay to speak to somebody like a trade union official or an employment law solicitor. You're not launching a big legal action or industrial dispute by doing so. You're simply getting the information that you need in order to be informed to help you to address it. And what an awful lot of people will do is they will try to help you to preserve the relationship and to try and resolve the matter, if that's still possible. It's not always possible. Yeah. Sometimes the behaviour can be too far gone at the stage where somebody feels ready and able to raise it with somebody. And if you reach that stage, you know, there are forums for legal redress. You can take a complaint to the Workplace Relations Commission. The Workplace Relations Commission does have the authority to make awards of compensation of up to 2 years remuneration or €40,000, depending on which is the greater. Pregnancy and maternity discrimination cases are cases that are taken very, very seriously by the Workplace Relations Commission and the Labour Court. And when they make awards of compensation, they tend to award them at a level that will be proportionate and dissuasive to deter against any kind of future behaviour.
Wow. Well, that was another question I was going to ask. It's like, if it does get to the point where you are presenting this as a case, is it difficult to prove discrimination? Like, because could they claim naivete or ignorance, you know?
So the employment equality legislation does recognise that discrimination isn't always a blunt instrument, and it isn't always readily obvious. Yes. You know, you may not find an email that says, I am discriminating against you because of your pregnancy. So it does recognise that the treatment can be very covert. So what you need to do is to be able to present a set of circumstances from which discrimination can be inferred. And then it's up to the employer to say that that did not happen.
Okay.
So it is recognised that, you know, it can be difficult to prove, but your evidence is proof, you know, and there will be weight placed on that.
That's good to know. That's good to know. I didn't realise how seriously that those kind of cases are taken. That's very encouraging, I suppose. Well, obviously it'd be better if we didn't need it, but
it would. And I think you'll find when you speak to an awful lot of women that have been impacted by discrimination, they would much rather have never seen the inside of the Workplace Relations Commission or the Labour Court. You know, litigation is stressful and lengthy and costly, but unfortunately, if you're put in a situation where your livelihood and your income is under threat, you may have no option but to proceed in that forum.
Yeah. Especially when you're in such a vulnerable position as being pregnant, you know?
Exactly.
Okay, let's talk about appointments and scans. Are we entitled to all of that time off, and how much notice should we give?
Okay, so when you notify your employer that you're pregnant, again, an awful lot of the information pertaining to your appointments and your scans should be contained in that maternity leave policy. But if it's not, you do still have statutory rights to time off to attend those appointments and scans. So your antenatal appointments, you are entitled to paid time off from work to attend those particular appointments. And that's quite significant when you actually think about what that means, because I think for people working in urban areas, you forget that, you know, you might just hop on a bus or the Lewis or take a walk down the street and you're in the maternity hospital, you're seen quickly and you come back.
Yes.
People might not even notice that you've stepped out of the workplace for an hour or two. But if you live in quite a rural area, or if you have a very high risk pregnancy where you might have more antenatal appointments than somebody else, it is quite significant that you can take that time off work without financial penalty, or without any kind of fear of being penalised or victimised for doing so. So it is really, really important, and it's great that women can have that security during their pregnancy. So that's for your antenatal appointments. Things like your antenatal classes, you are entitled to paid time off, but only for one set of classes.
Okay.
So even if you have multiple pregnancies, you will only have paid time off for antenatal classes for your first pregnancy, for example.
Really?
Yes.
I saw someone on Instagram. This is one of these amazing tidbits you find on Instagram. It was actually a girl from the UK saying that you're entitled to ask for time off for a pregnancy Pilates class. Now, this was someone in the UK, so I wondered, like, does that translate over here? Could I swing a Pilates class at lunchtime? Like,
I love clients like you, Síomha, that are always encouraging me to push the boundaries and parameters of employment legislation. No,
okay.
The legislation is quite prescriptive. It must be a medical appointment, and it must be for the purposes of an examination or undergoing a test that is under the supervision of or under the direction of a registered medical practitioner. So no Pilates. But I take your point in that, you know, if you're suffering with pelvic girdle pain or back pain, you know, doing something like Pilates might be clinically indicated. So maybe in the future, but not now.
No, see, this is why I'm talking to professionals and not listening to any old person on Instagram. So I appreciate you being here, Michelle. Let's move on then to people who freelance, the self-employed.
Yes.
What are they covered? It's a little bit more complicated, isn't it?
Well, yeah, yes and no. Okay. So the thing to remember about being pregnant when you're self-employed is that unlike the traditional approach to employment law, where you might only have particular employment rights and entitlements if you're employed under a contract of employment, the legislation pertaining to pregnancy discrimination actually extends to people who are self-employed. So it's a bit wider in scope. So a self-employed contractor or freelancer will have all of the same protections as an employee when they're pregnant.
Okay.
So again, that's quite significant, and we can thank the European Union for that particular right and entitlement. They are also entitled to avail of state maternity benefit, provided they have the requisite PRSI contributions. So it's very important, if you are a self-employed person, that you have all of your accounts and tax returns up to date for the years prior to you applying for your maternity benefit.
Okay. I made the decision to step away from a presenting job earlier this year because I was working 7 days a week, and I was like, something's got to give, and I prioritised the job that did offer paid maternity leave, you know. So I find it's just tough, I suppose, for the self-employed, you know, that they kind of have to make those decisions and prioritise different things. Is there, like, they should be saving really beforehand as well then, shouldn't they? Saving up for their maternity leave?
It would certainly help, you know. And look, it's very easy for me to sit here and to explain, oh, you have all of the same protections as an employee, when the reality is that if you work for yourself, if you don't work, you're not getting paid. And even if you're choosing to take a period of time out to have your baby and have some period of maternity leave, you may have ongoing costs that an employee may not have because of the fact that you're self-employed. And there may be certain client relationships that you are trying to maintain and preserve during your period of maternity leave as well. So there's certainly an awful lot more to juggle. But again, I think with the right type of planning and the right type of supports in place, it's certainly doable.
Yeah. Okay. And then we were talking earlier about how like extended paternity leave could help even out the playing field for women in future in terms of equality in the workplace. What other changes would you like to see in this field that would also help women?
I think there's lots of different changes. We could probably have an entire episode to discuss that in and of itself.
I'll get you back for season 2, Michelle.
But I think the culture of organisations play a huge part in implementing change. And with any organisation, cultural shifts happen from the top down. So if we see the leaders of organisations and top level management parenting out loud in the workplace, I think that sends a message to other more junior employees in the organisation that this is an acceptable way of working, that I can request flexibility on a particular day of the week to attend a GP appointment with my child or to finish early to go to a school concert. All of that makes such a huge difference and brings everyone a long way away from the day where people would be leaving a coat hanging on the back of the chair to make it look like they're still in the building and slinking away, hoping that their absence would go unnoticed. I think that parenting out loud across all levels in an organisation is something that is really, really helpful in moving everything forward. I think there's also legislative changes that would really help level the playing field. As you say, you know, if we did have extended paternity leave or shared maternity leave, if we approached it from a family and parent point of view as opposed to a mother and father point of view, I certainly think that would be very helpful. We do know that about 80% of the gender pay gap is because of the motherhood penalty. So in introducing structures and frameworks that support working families, I think would really, really help and go a long way into the future.
Beautiful. Michelle, I hope all of our politicians and legislators are listening and they'll take heed of your advice.
I would love to tell you of that level of influence.
Well, Michelle, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm just delighted with that chat, and I'm feeling so informed.
Good, and empowered, I hope.
Absolutely. Thanks a million.
Thank you.
Well, there's lots to think about now after that chat. I'm so delighted with that chat. I found it so informative. And even me now at 6 months pregnant, I'm still trying to get all my ducks in a row in terms of my maternity leave. Like I said, I did apply for my maternity leave on mywelfare.ie and I found it really quick and really easy. So I would recommend doing it that way rather than sending in your forms physically. Who knew? 2025, you can do things online. I do approach things with positivity and I don't expect discrimination to rear its ugly head. But as Michelle said, these things do still happen in today's age. So it's good to know what should you do if it does happen to you. Okay, I'm now craving a monstrous bowl of ready brek, and what baby wants, baby gets. So I'm going to go and treat myself to some cold ready brek for some reason that I like it cold at the moment. But do join me next week. I'm going to be talking to Jess Willow, who is a fertility and pregnancy dietitian, all about what we should and shouldn't be eating during pregnancy. Actually, I'm not going to say shouldn't. There's no finger wagging going on here. You will not leave this episode feeling guilty. It's just what should we be mindful of during pregnancy. Thank you so much for listening to the first episode of Labour of Love. If you're also on a pregnancy journey, remember we are 1 week closer to meeting our baba. Good day and chatting to hugging. So on.